Hello, everyone, and welcome to VRIGHT Wall Conversations, a curated leadership dialogue series hosted by VRIGHT Exchange under the VRIGHT Academy Series. I'm Rana, co-founder of VRIGHT Exchange. Today, we are delighted to feature Stanley Glancy, acclaimed author of the VIKING Framework, a highly practical and structured model for designing high impact communication campaigns that drive measurable outcomes, alignment, and long term credibility. Stanley brings over 2 decades of experience across global organizations, spanning consulting, technology, pharmaceuticals, and corporate communications. His work has focused on helping organizations navigate transformation, leadership, communication, stakeholder engagement, and strategic alignment in increasingly dynamic environments. His book, The Viking Framework, introduces a six-phase communication model, including one, validate, ideate, kick off, improvise, nurture, and gaze. In today's conversation, we will decode this framework and explore its practical, real world applications for founders, listed companies, investor relation teams, communication strategies, and leadership professionals. Stanley, welcome to Be Right Wall Conversations. It is a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you, Aryan. Thank you for the warm welcome and for the great introduction. And thank you for having me on this platform this afternoon.
All right. So we have prepared 9 focused questions followed by a 5 question rapid fire round. So without further delay, let's begin. Stanley, before we discuss the framework itself, I would like to begin with the journey behind it. You have spent nearly 2 decades helping organizations communicate through change, growth, and transformation. So I have a first question to you is what made you realize communication needed a more structured strategy first approach? Over to you.
Thank you for the question, Aryan. So the Viking framework is co-written with my co-author Akanksha Bhargav. We have spent, both of us have spent nearly 2 decades helping organizations communicate strategy, manage change, and build credibility through organizational transformation and business growth. The framework itself came from a very practical moment. This was years back, more than a decade back, probably. A junior colleague of mine asked me, is there a standard process for running campaigns, or do we need to figure it out each time? At that point in time, the honest answer was too often we were figuring it out on the go each time. But that question stayed with me, and I explored multiple sources for an answer, Google books, but didn't come across any one particular book or paper that provided practical tips and tools. Having said that, there are plenty of books on the theory of communications, but what we were looking for is something that people can immediately apply and use in their day-to-day work. While thinking about this, shortly after there's a chance remark by a senior global leader who was visiting India at that point in time, that stayed in my mind as well. He said, if you want a seat at the table, you need to speak the language of business and deliver outcomes that add value in a measurable way. Now, you have been in communications, Aryan, and I think you would agree with this. Most of us communication professionals know what needs to be done, but very often we are on the back foot because we are not probably able to articulate what we are recommending is the right approach. So that's what set me on a path of identifying a repeatable process that can enhance our success potential. Now, my co-author was already known for running several high impact campaigns, and I started studying them very closely to see if there are any patterns that I could replicate. And I did identify a few patterns which I applied to my own campaigns, and I suddenly started seeing significant success in what we are doing. So what I realized is that the communications that worked had a structure behind them, even if none of us had really named it. So each of those successful campaigns had validated a real problem. They aligned the right people before kicking off. They launched with intent. They adapted when reality changed, and they sustained the momentum over a period of time. And of course, very important, the measurement of what actually changed or what moved. So that's where the framework comes from. Uh, so it is basically naming the structure behind these campaigns. At that point in time, our intent was to provide new communicators or those considering a career in in this field a guide. But as we developed and explored it further, we realized the same discipline applies far beyond communication teams. It could apply to founders, HR leaders, transformation teams, investor relation professionals, anyone who basically needs to help people understand, believe, and act, and needed a purpose, a process to do that.
Right. So that's a very important point because many organizations focus heavily on execution, but often without fully defining what success actually looks like. So, which brings me to the next question, Stanley. So, when we say a campaign has failed, what does failure actually mean? Are there different kind of failures leaders should watch for?
Absolutely. So you are now a founder, Aryan, and what if you would agree with it when I say that every company, every CEO, every founder, and even the communication teams behind it, everybody wants or is basically asking people to believe in a future that it hasn't fully delivered yet. You might go to an investor, you might go to any stakeholder, and you want them to believe in the future that you are looking at delivering. And communication is the work of making that future clear, credible, and actionable over time. Which brings me to your question about failure. Now, failure needs to be defined. Failure might not be exactly uh, what we are expecting. For instance, an obvious failure is when nobody really interacts with the campaign, nobody even notices the campaign. But to me, a more abject failure is when everybody notices it, but nothing has changed. You are not getting your investors. You are not getting, uh, the desired outcome from the campaign. This could be based internally or even externally, helping people shift their understanding, build confidence in your product, build confidence in your company, change behaviors to help you deliver that, build trust, or take some action, a call to action, be it employees, customers, investors, regulators, partners, or even the general public who are buying a product. Now, there are a few different kind of failures that we need to watch out for, especially leaders who are communicating to varied stakeholders. The first is, of course, validation failure. And this is based on a personal experience as well, where you solve the wrong problem based on your assumption or test the wrong variable. The second is interpretation failure. And to your specific audience, this could be even more relevant, the investor relations. A company says something, but the market hears something else. For instance, you might be excited about announcing an expansion, and the investors hear risk in the model. Or a founder communicates great ambition, but an analyst hears overreach in the market. So message was sent correctly, but the intended meaning did not land. So that's something else that you need to test. The third is an alignment failure. So you have an external story, but your internal reality is different. The investor narrative and the leadership behavior do not match fully. So your credibility starts getting impacted. And then, of course, within the book itself, you will read about the need to nurture and sustain momentum. You launched a campaign with a lot of fanfare. You will launch a business with a lot of energy, but soon the energy disappears, and there is no sustained action or a building of belief in your campaign.
That's a very interesting perspective. Failure is not always visible immediately. It can also be a failure of alignment, trust, and a long-term outcomes. Uh,
Absolutely.
so now let's talk about the framework itself. So the third question to you is, what fundamentally sets the biking framework apart from traditional communication or marketing models? Over to you.
So many leaders look at communication as messaging. That was a traditional model. Of course, things have evolved and different organizations treat communication in different way. But even today, to a large extent, messaging communication is seen as a messaging function. Now, when you take a step back, what is messaging? Messaging is just a moment, right? And discipline is a system. So when you treat communication as messaging, when a leader treats communication as messaging, you're basically thinking in those individual moments. You're thinking of that product launch or that announcement or that press release or that investor deck. Internally, you might be thinking about a campaign launch or a town hall. Now, you might spend a lot of time and effort crafting each of them very carefully, but then the organization just moves on. The problem is that a message on its own rarely changes anything. It does inform people, but it does not automatically change that information into understanding or building the trust that you want or making sure people are taking the action that you expect them to take. A disciplined approach, on the other hand, asks a better set of questions, which is what the Viking framework is all about. So you ask what needs to change. You
Absolutely.
ask which stakeholder group needs to move. You ask what do they currently believe in and what will make my message more credible to this audience. How do we launch with alignment with the right stakeholders? How do we adapt when things change? How do we sustain the message over a period of time? Or how do we even know whether anything has actually moved? Right? So that is what Viking is designed to do. At the start of this conversation, you mentioned it stands for validate your vision,
Yeah.
ideate, great ideas, kick off with plumb, improvise if things go wrong, nurture what works, gauge or measure what is changing. Six phases. But more than that, six phases are really six leadership questions. The power is not in that acronym. We came up with that also as a mnemonic to remember what you need to do. But it is more about the connection between each of these phases. A campaign or a communication that is not validated well will struggle to measure impact later. A launch without alignment will eventually lose momentum. Or if you don't have a nurture plan in place, it will eventually fade. So that's what we are trying to address, making sure that instead of looking at moments, you're treating as a discipline, as a system that will help you deliver results.
All right. So I think that distinction between activity and strategic clarity is extremely relevant today, especially in the fast-moving business environments. So let's move now into the first phase of the framework, which is validate. And you have already touched upon that, but I have a question on that. How can leaders ensure that they are solving the right problem before launching campaign?
So like you said, I touched upon this earlier, but in the book, we use a tool called the validation compass. It has three parts or the three P's, which is purpose, priority, and prerequisites. Purpose is very obvious to all of us. It is the why, right? Why is this communication? Why now? And why does this matter to the business or to the audience you're reaching out to? If you cannot articulate in one sentence what this communication is for, you are not ready to communicate. So that's one thing leaders or anybody communicating, be it founders or CEOs or the C-suite, need to be very clear about. Next is priority. This is about what really matters. Now, most leaders, all of us generally, are tempted to say everything that we know, but the audience can only carry so much. And especially today, right, in the day of social media where attention span is low, you need to be very sure about the two or three things that you have to make sure lands with your audience.
Yeah.
The third is the third prerequisites. This is about what makes the message credible and what will help you deliver the message impactfully. So credibility means the right proof points, the right data, the right audience insight to ensure that you're validating the right variables. And then, of course, you need the leadership backing, the team backing, the channels, the timing, all of that. has to be part of this prerequisite. If those are missing, more messaging itself will not compensate for that lag. There are several examples of this. That new Coke, for instance, which was launched a few like couple of decades back, is a great example. I keep going back to. But validation is not just about collecting data; it is making sure you are asking the right questions, and that I think is the leadership skill that you need to develop first and foremost.
Absolutely, absolutely. So that's a powerful thought because many campaigns fail even before launch when the core problem statement itself is unclear. So the
Yes.
next phase is ideate, where collaboration becomes critical. So my question to you is, what does effective cross-functional ideation look like in complex organizations? Over to you.
Collaboration is something all businesses talk about. We all want to excel at. What is important in this instance, especially when it comes to ideation or even the later implementation, is to ensure that leaders are bringing all the different functions together right at the start so that the campaign or the communication reflects the full business reality and not just one team's view. This is very important, and this ties in with what we're discussing in the previous question as well.
Yeah.
Ensuring your validation doesn't become victim to assumptions and biases. We are all prone to that. We will not even realize that.
Yeah.
So that's the key focus here,
All right.
and it starts with bringing the right voices in early enough to shape the work. Now, from a communications point of view, and especially when we go out externally, we bring in a lot of stakeholders, but usually for the approval stage. What the shift we need to make is bringing them right at the start to shape the work. And this can, of course, mean spending more time initially to get it right. But I think that saves us a lot of time earlier. For complex campaigns, you need to have those functional voices, you need to have those audience voices. The functional voices internally can be your finance, legal, HR, investor relations, your sales, operations, and even communications, of course. Now, each of these functions see a different part of the reality. From your own experience, you know the finance knows what the numbers can support, legal knows what can and cannot be said, HR gives you that people perspective, IR knows how the market could potentially interpret the message. Sales, of course, is connected with customers and knows what they want to hear or what they will hear based on what you're saying. In addition to this, you also need the audience voices.
Yes.
From my experience, I know that different markets, employee groups, customer groups, and different stakeholders like analysts, investors could read the same campaign very differently. If no one is in the room reflecting those realities, the campaign may land well in one place and miss out on another.
Yeah.
But this, of course, does not mean that every communication needs to be a large workshop. This is where a communications lead, a strategic communications practitioner brings in their perspective, brings in their discretion. A routine update, for instance, doesn't need 10 voices in the room. The discipline is in knowing when the stakes are high enough to require deeper ideation. Could be a transformation, for instance, a lot of that going on right now. Could be a merger acquisition, a strategic pivot, cultural change, or a major market announcement. The so-called efficiency of skipping those voices early could often cost more time later. So bring people in as shapers of the message and not just as approvers at a later stage.
All right. So that's a communication becomes much more than messaging. It becomes organizational alignment. So, but even the best strategies meet resistance once execution begins. So, my question to
Absolutely.
you is, campaigns often face real world resistance. Can you share an example where adapting midway changed the outcome? Over to you.
You are absolutely right. Even the best laid plans can meet resistance when reality pushes back, right? So, how can we, the leaders we're working with, or if you're a founder or a senior leader, how can you adapt without losing that strategic direction? That's the focus. Now, in the book, we have given a case study. called Project One Vision. It is based on a real life case study, of course, anonymized uh, for for confidentiality reasons.
Yeah.
It's a post-merger integration campaign
Correct.
where we launched a new strategy campaign. The launch went very well,
Hmm.
better than expected, actually. We were expecting maybe 60, 70% traction, and it crossed over 90%.
Oh.
But that also created some new pressure for us.
Acha.
Registration was higher than planned, a good problem to have. But the platform slowed down in some regions. Some teams felt that the scenarios that we had in the particular case study we were using or the program we were using were too Western centric,
Hmm.
and some managers were not giving time to people to participate. Now, this we found this out after we dug in a little deeper, and we are ready to assess that as a campaign progressed. The standard response or the easy response would have been to push harder, right? What we usually do is more emails, more reminders, more messages from the leadership. But here, since we decided to do some sense checking, we realized the problem is entirely different, and we were able to quickly adapt to handle that. We, of course, had to work with IT and the operations technical team to make sure that those access related problems were resolved. We created very region specific challenge variants as well. We helped managers also understand how this could result in dividends for them as well. We also engaged in some additional activities like team rebalancing to ensure that the people from both parts of the merged organization being part of this also helped uh, you know uh, build stronger relations between the two organizations that were coming together. And we also, of course, communicated with videos and other platforms to clarify any misunderstanding people seem to have about what the new strategy is all about. So that changed the outcome. The campaign did not succeed because the original plan was perfect. Succeeded because the team listened to what was actually happening on the ground and adjusted very quickly without losing the destination. The mistake leaders often make is confusing the destination with the route. If there are challenges along the way, don't forget your destination. Maybe you need to relook at the route and change the route to reach the right destination, because that's what you're trying to achieve.
Correct. Correct. So that's a great example of why agility and responsiveness are now essential leadership capabilities. However, many campaigns lose energy after the initial excitement fades. So, my question to you is, what are the most effective ways to ensure campaigns don't lose momentum after launch? Stanley.
Yeah, this again ties in with what I mentioned in the previous discussion we had. We need to be very clear of the destination and stay clear on terms of achieving the destination without the route is something that we can change. Now, momentum is also about sustaining engagement is also about sustaining trust after a big announcement or a big merger and acquisition or a big launch, especially when all your stakeholders, be it external or internal, are watching you in terms of whether your words are turning into action. Now, campaigns can lose momentum when a launch is treated as a finish line. We put it so much of energy and effort into having a great launch
Yeah.
that we sometimes tend to not plan so much for what's coming next.
Mm.
So you sustain that momentum, you need a certain sense of rhythm.
Yeah.
You need proof. You need ownership within the teams. Now, in this case, rhythm, when I say rhythm, what I'm referring to is does the campaign keep showing up in existing business routines?
Yeah.
So it's not just a campaign for a campaign's sake, but is your existing business routine also reflecting that change? Proof, of course, data points or actions which people see in terms of evidence becoming making the promise real. So when you're making a launch or when you're making an announcement, you're basically making a promise of sorts. What is the evidence to show that that's becoming real? And how do you get your owners, which is your leaders, managers, teams, who are carrying the message after the communication is launched, to be aligned and stay true to it? People don't stay engaged because they hear the same message again and again. That is required at some level, but they actually get more engaged when they see that progress. So trust is not built at that moment of announcement. It is built between all those announcements you make. It is your announcement, like I said, is a promise. What follows is the proof that you need to show. The proof should match your promise, and then trust compounds, and you can build on that momentum.
Absolutely. So, sustained engagement often determines whether communication creates temporary attention or lasting impact. Now, let's move to one of the most debated area in modern communications, uh, communication and measurement. When it comes to measurement, so my question to you is, which metrics truly reflect impact, and what should leaders stop relying on? Over to you.
You're absolutely right. Measurement has always been a challenge in areas like marketing communication.
Yes.
It has become easier because there are a lot more tools here, and with AI in the mix, I'm sure we'll see a lot more tools that will help us analyze the many data points that communicators have to see
Mhm.
what's working, what's not.
Yeah.
At a high level, leaders need to move beyond visibility metrics and measure what communication has actually changed in terms of understanding, confidence, behavior, or trust. And that's why the validation at the start is very important to know what is it that you want to achieve at the end of the campaign. Now, to your point, the visibility metrics are the easiest to count, right? Be it views, impressions, open rate, attendance at an event, click through rate, all of that. They all have value. They actually tell you whether people saw something, right? They actually tell you whether people interacted with your content. But they do not tell you whether people really understood it, believed it, or even acted on it. Now, there is a story we use in the book that captures this. There's a financial services organization which celebrated a high open rate on a major strategy email communication that went out. But they also made sure that they tested this, and this was around 6, 7 weeks later.
Okay.
They ran a kind of quiz kind of thing to trust to check whether people really understood the strategy. Interestingly, fewer than 10% could articulate, what the strategy meant to them.
Mm.
So a high open rate, which is vanity metrics, as we call it, important because I definitely landed in everybody's inbox.
Yeah.
But the metrics that really mattered showed that the communication had actually failed.
Yeah.
So the real variables, it can be measured. You need to plan for it based on what campaign you're launching out. You need to make sure that that you are measuring understanding. For instance, can people really explain the message in their own words? Confidence is something else that you can measure. Do they believe the strategy will work?
Yeah.
Behaviors, what did they do differently afterwards, after your campaign or during your campaign or once your campaign ended?
Yeah.
And trust, at the next announcement, do stakeholders give the organization the benefit of doubt, or do they apply more skepticism? And that can also be measured. We do a lot of anonymous surveys which make sure that people are giving you the candid response.
Yeah.
Can be painful at times, but I think that's what's required to build that trust and take it to the next level.
Yeah. All right. So that distinction between meaningful impact and vanity metrics is becoming increasingly important today's AI-driven information environment. Last question of this: how can founders, listed companies, and investor relations team apply the Viking framework to build trust, long-term market credibility, especially in today's fast-changing environment? Stanley.
So the Viking framework was designed to help communications change from one-off communication into a long-term credibility system. What founders, listed companies, investor relation teams need to do is look at it in that sense. Think of it in arcs and not just in disconnected announcements. Most companies still tend to treat communication moment as a separate event. The earnings release is one project.
Yeah.
the product launch is another project, and all of those could be successful in their own ways, right? We can have a great product launch. The leadership change or restructuring is another announcement. The investor deck, which you present to your investors on the day of your quarterly results or what, could be well executed, could land very well. But what we need to look at is whether the stakeholder experience is seamless or whether it is fragmented. Is there a larger story holding them together? And is that something you can repeat across each of these announcements? Right? A credibility system works very differently. It treats each communication, like all of the things that I mentioned above and more, treats
Mhm.
each of them as part of a long-term story.
Absolutely.
And I think that's where the framework, the Viking framework really helps.
Yes.
Right at the start, validate at the overall messaging that you narrative you want to build, and within each of those communication, what is it that will keep each message grounded in that same business truth. How do you bring the right voices into the story? How do you ensure that you are picking up sense making based on the data you're getting from your stakeholders, be it internal or external,
Mhm.
and ensuring that you are responding without losing the thread of the overall narrative that you want to build, and how you're nurturing the story between each of those major announcements, between each of those investor relation moments that you may have, between each of the quarterly results that you announce,
Absolutely.
and then putting in place ways to measure whether your trust is growing or
Mhm.
shrinking. And this matters even more today. You mentioned AI, because AI is flooding each channel with more and more content, right?
Yeah.
The signal that gets through will not simply be a polished announcement, it will
Yeah.
be the company whose words, numbers, decisions keep telling the same story over and over
Absolutely.
time. So
Absolutely.
for founders and IR teams, my personal opinion is the investor narrative shouldn't be just the deck that you present. It is a relationship between the promise you make, the
Yeah.
performance the company delivers, the proof points you show, and the leadership behaviors being sustained across each of the cycles.
Absolutely. So we've come to an end to this interesting and insightful session with you, Stanley. Thank you for sharing such thoughtful and practical insights with us today. From understanding why communication campaigns fail to building strategy first frameworks, adapting in uncertain environments, sustaining stakeholder engagement, and measuring real impact. This conversation has offered valuable lessons for founders, listed companies, investigation teams, and communication leaders alike. And I believe the biggest takeaway from today's discussion is that communication is no longer just about visibility, it's about clarity, alignment, credibility, and long term trust. So it was great having you with us today, Stanley. Thank you so much once again for joining us on VRIGHT Wall Conversation.
Thank you, Aryan. Thank you for the opportunity. And I hope this short video cast helps each of us to work on making that future, make the future that you want companies to believe in more clear, credible, and actionable over time. Thank you for the opportunity. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you so much, Stanley. It was great having you with us. And once again, we thank you for joining us on VRIGHT Wall Conversations. On behalf of VRIGHT Exchange and VRIGHT Academy Series, we truly appreciate your time and perspective. And we look forward to having you again with us on the show. Thank you. To our viewers, thank you for joining us. Stay connected and VRIGHT Exchange for more leadership conversations, practitioner insights, and leadership sessions. Until next time, thank you and stay tuned.